This discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 3 was recorded in June 2023 prior to the Hollywood writers and actors strikes.
It's like a navigator getting ready to fly.
I know. And we're going to be cruising at a comfortable altitude of 3,200 feet. That's very low.
Very low. We're cruising low.
300 feet.
Just a very easy, low cruise.
Hitting buildings.
Casual.
3,200. Actually, the new Top Gun movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. Exciting news for this episode. Really thrilled to welcome Ciri, who you'll know from the newest Olympian, as an audio editor for the discussions on Breakfast in Beauclair. I cannot express how much gratitude and appreciation I have for Ciri and her work. Having her as an editor has absolutely changed my quality of life more than I can even express. And I'm so grateful to have her, and I'm sure you guys will love her and her work on these discussions for the rest of the season. If I haven't spoken about it enough on the last few episodes, our Poland Hansa meetup, again, if you're interested, let me know. We'll be in Krakow, Poland, the weekend of August 9th through 12th. As for this episode, we welcome Kitty to our hanza over on Patreon. Thank you as always to our patrons and our producer-level patrons, Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Vanguard Glamorai, the Original Roach, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. If you would like to support me, Ciri, and everything that happens on this podcast, please consider supporting the show on Patreon at patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Kyle from the US and Sam from the US call in for Netflix's The Witcher episode 302 Unbound. Join us as we discuss Yennefer's evolving relationship with Ciri, a debate on which Nilfgaardian has the short stick, a truly horrific monster of the week, and the things men will do instead of going to therapy. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher episode 302 Unbound. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming two members of our hanza to the show. My first guest is a dad and coach from the US who you'll recognize from his previous appearances on Breakfast in Beauclair, episodes 53 to 55, covering episode 203, What is Lost. He can often be found in the hanza Discord, swapping beer recommendations, playing D&D, or sharing pictures of his beautiful daughter, Freya. My second guest hails from the Pacific Northwest, where he enjoys hiking in the woods and cups of coffee. He's an avid Warhammer 40k fan, just like Henry Cavill himself, which he will talk about only slightly longer than The Witcher if you let him. Please welcome Kyle and Sam from the US. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey.
Hello.
It is so nice to have you on the show. Welcome back, Kyle. Welcome,
Thank you.
Sam.
Thank you.
And just as we, get started, as we normally do, Sam, I'd love to hear from you how you got into the world of The Witcher.
I was a young bachelor living in the Pacific Northwest. I had just joined the Army. I was watching G4 TV back when that still existed. And I remember seeing these trailers for this interesting game called The Witcher 3 and was like, oh, that looks kind of neat. Maybe I'll give that a whirl. Unaware of the black hole I was about to be sucked into at incredible velocity. So played the game. It immediately became my top RPG of all time. And I just, like many people, began to inhale the books right after that and just completely fell in love with the characters and the universe. Been here ever since, having a great time.
Oh, that's so fun. How did you find the podcast and the community and everything too?
Yeah, so my job at one point was requiring me to drive about 90 minutes each direction, which is a bit of a lengthy commute.
That's so long.
Yes, that was a bit rough. I wasn't really into podcasts yet, but I was like, well, let me see if there's any podcasts about topics that I'm kind of interested in. So I started just searching for one. I found one about Warhammer 40K, which I love, but I also found one about The Witcher, Breakfast in Beauclair, and just I think you were midway through a season, and I just restarted the season, and it was going through one of the books, and I was like, this is perfect. So it made that an immediate part of my drive time listening, and I've just been, sucking it up ever since. So really excited to actually make an appearance on it. It's a little surreal, but I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I've just been collecting people's like first podcast appearances over the last few years, which is just so fun. Like being able to share this experience with people like all over the world, and just it's so weird, it's so strange, and yeah, very surreal. And I
Very,
love
very cool.
that. You mentioned Warhammer 40K, which people, if they're not familiar with the world, will be kind of like loosely familiar with the name because apparently Henry Cavill's a big Warhammer 40K boy.
Yeah.
So, just for like a quick TLDR, is there like a reason that Witcher fans might be interested in getting into Warhammer 40K?
That's a great question, especially because Warhammer 40K and I think the Witcher franchises are just so different. Warhammer started as a tabletop game where you paint miniatures and you move them and you roll dice for hits and wounds, and there's a big complex rule book that goes with it. And obviously, The Witcher just started as a fantasy book series, but there is a certain degree of crossover in the sense that the Warhammer 40K universe is what we call grimdark, in that there's not really any good guys. It's kind of just degrees of bad. Things are not terrific. It's known for being like really over the top kind of on purpose, but it does share with The Witcher this background scenario of like things are not really terrific. Even the good guys are not really that good if you kind of dive into their character a little bit. And I feel like we get a lot of that in the Witcher universe, where this is dark fantasy. The bottom line is like, even the people who are mostly good still willing to do some pretty bad stuff in pursuit of those ends. And I feel like there's a lot of characters from The Witcher that really kind of come out with that sort of philosophy. So there is some crossover there, but I mean, Warhammer 40K has books, it has video games, it has tabletop, it's got a whole bunch of stuff, and potentially a television series from Henry Cavill coming, since he's, this is all rumor mill, obviously, left, Netflix to go kind of pursue something there. So that would be exciting.
I mean, you can't see it, but I'm just listening so intently because, oh, the listeners can't see it because I have no idea anything about Warhammer 40K. Definitely have heard of it. I'm sure just like everybody else. And I'm just like, I don't know what this is. And I feel like that was a really good overview of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when Henry Cavill started talking about it in interviews, I know one of my friends is really into it. So I turned to him and asked, like, could you give me a short summary of what 40K is? And he was like, how much time you got?
Yeah,
no.
right.
He was like, no, there's way too much.
It's one of those like cult following things too. It's like The Witcher in that sense. I feel like you have a strong feeling for this thing.
Yeah.
I tried to explain it to my brother-in-law the other day while we were doing some yard work. And it starts as this like, so the Imperium man is that, okay, I need to back up. So the Primarchs are these guys. Hold on, I got to back up further. So the Emperor of Mankind is, I got to back further. So the old ones are, and you just like, it just goes and goes and
wow.
goes.
Got some deep lore.
Yeah, the lore behind it. I mean, it keeps expanding. There's new lore being written right now for Warhammer 40K. So it's a much more larger kind of complex universe, I guess you could say, than The Witcher, if only because Games Workshop, who owns the franchise, has like a dozen writers writing new lore all the time, whereas The Witcher has one author, producing books at whatever, pace he decides to produce them. So yeah, that's why you could talk for 4 hours about 40K and what the Imperium of Man is, and just scratch the kind of top of it, basically.
That's so interesting. I mean, even just like stepping like lightly into D&D, I know Kyle, you're still playing, right?
Yeah.
But just seeing kind of the lore and the depth with the year that I played, so much fun, so interesting. But I'd love to hear from you, Kyle, too, about like what you've been up to since your last appearance. I know D&D with the Hanza is a huge part of that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, how have you been since your appearance like 25 episodes ago or so?
Sure, yeah. Well, welcome back to our Warhammer podcast.
We have a new concept for season 5. Totally different.
Oh, man. No, it's funny when you said, Sam, when you were talking before about, you said G4, and it like took me immediately back to watching like Attack of the Show with Olivia Munn, my first love.
I know. Suddenly I'm 22 again. Like,
yeah, man. Yeah. So D&D is the constant in my life, I feel like. Gary, one of our loved members of the Hanza, he's got a real job now. He's a real boy, so he isn't doing our D&D anymore. So we have James, who was just on the last episode, and he has been really great to have as a DM. It brings a new personality into like how the games are run and the stories are told. And when D&D came into my life, it was like something was awoken. It's just so much fun to like role play and just pretend you're something else, someone else for a little while in the day. And it's like, to have that with a bunch of friends that I've made over the years is it's super special. D&D and starting my own business and watching that become a little successful, well, then also failing a little bit and learning life lessons and, you know, figuring out my way there and having my daughter. And was Freya around last time?
I want to say no. I think it's been... Okay, listen, 25 episodes ago, and the episodes come out every other week. I would say that was probably like a year ago.
Okay, so she was probably like 6 months old at the time when we recorded, maybe even younger, because when you record, it's like before that. So like,
well, you recorded with Laura. You guys were scheming about stuff, right?
Oh,
so was
yeah,
that before?
That's right.
Was that before Freya was born? Then?
So we definitely were scheming before Freya was born, because what ended up happening, I commissioned her for a painting of. So Freya is a figure in lore of the Nordic lore. So she's like the goddess of love and all this other stuff. And so we commissioned her for a painting of the goddess Freya with our 2 cats pulling the chariot, because it's 2 cats pulling the chariot. And so it was a lot of fun, and it's a beautiful painting, and we still have it up in her room, and Alora is one of my favorites.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. She's an incredible artist. I always, like the other day I saw she put up a picture of like her progress from sketch or like just the initial lines all the way to the end, and it was like the most beautiful transition into like the end piece, and I was like, I love her art so much. It's so good.
Yeah. And you can find Alora's work on Instagram and Twitter, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so cool. Like some of the friendships that come out of like podcast guests, I can never anticipate when they're going to like spark fire. Obviously, like gold standard Alicia and Sarah we're insane together. But also like Charlie and Jess, who like still watch movies together.
That's
you
so
and
cute.
Laura,
That's so
I
cool.
love it. Like I love that she is part of your story now.
Yeah.
With your daughter, and that you guys were able to meet through Breakfast in Beauclair, which is like wild to me.
Literally, like it's so crazy that you bring that up, because like Breakfast in Beauclair and the Hanza, the Discord and all that has been a centerpiece of my life now for a lot of good things, you know, that have happened, and a lot of good friends that I have now. It's insane. Before we were recording, I was talking to Sam, and he was saying how he literally lived in the same town that I grew up. And so it's like, now we have something in common.
It's genuinely been like such a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so excited. That's like, hey, listeners, like if you haven't joined the Hanza Discord,
right.
bit.ly/the Hanza Discord. And yeah, you can make friends there and then see us in Vienna in October.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I said, so nice to have you both on the show. And I'm really excited to dig into this episode of Season 3 as well. And today we'll continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 3 with episode 302, Unbound, in which a shocking discovery awaits Geralt after he obtains information on Rince. Ciri's sense of justice causes problems, and Jaskier performs for a royal fan. Here's a quick synopsis of the episode from future Alyssa. In episode 302, Unbound, Yennefer sends a message to Tissaia asking to return home to Aretuza. Ciri sees visions of the past and future and prophesies the death of a royal messenger, Applegat. Yennefer and Ciri visit the sorceress Kira Metz for a portal back to the school. But when a man comes in with a captured elven boy, Ciri has a vision of the boy's grim future. She intervenes, releasing him, and Yennefer kills the man before he can attack them. He turns out to be the henchman of a powerful man, Huvanagal, and Kira runs, leaving Yennefer and Ciri to fend for themselves. In the south, Emhyr monologues about what he envisions for himself and the world as the new emperor of the continent. Meanwhile, Fringilla has been left to rot, imprisoned in a wine cellar, and forced to be a poison tester for the Emperor. By the end of the episode, she escapes by hiding herself in a body bag with another dead prisoner. Geralt and Jaskier visit Codringer and Fen, still seeking information about Rince. Geralt learns that he was kicked out of Banard and shares his suspicion that Rince is working for another, more powerful sorcerer. Fen reveals his benefactor is connected to Vuilpanne Castle, but also that Istrid, among others, have reached out to them looking for Ciri. In Aretuza, the Northern mages argue about the best course of action for the Northern kingdoms and how to manage their monarchs. Triss assists Tissaia at the school and discovers blood in a missing student's room. In Redania, Dijkstra tells Philippa about his first kill as she whips him. Afterward, she asks Dijkstra to talk to Radovid as she sees potential in his skills. Jaskier visits Radovid and the prince promises to investigate Rince. Radovid passes this information to Philippa and Dijkstra. Despite Dijkstra's insistence that Vizimir has no secrets from him, Radovid reveals that the king had a secret meeting with Nilfgaard. Rince appears in Codringer and Fen's study and kills them, setting the building ablaze. Philippa follows Rince through his portal as an owl. Cahir is saved by Gallatin as he is beaten in the woods while raiding northern caravans for the Emperor. As they catch up, Gallatin mentions Francesca's search for Ciri, which piques Cahir's interest. Tissaia and Vilgefortz anticipate Yennefer's return to Aretuza. Vilgefortz gives Tissaia a necklace that he claims has protective abilities. Ciri and Yennefer argue about the morality and consequences of her impulsive actions back at the market. When Ciri questions Yennefer's perspective, the mage brings her to the fields where her childhood home once stood. Yennefer shares her personal history and the mistake she has made to imprint the importance of consequence. In Vuilpanne Castle, Geralt makes a horrifying discovery. Rince's benefactor has been experimenting on women, resulting in a headless monster of fused flesh and bone. He kills the creature and saves one girl from Vuilpanne, who believes herself to be Ciri. So now that we've gotten a synopsis from future Alyssa, I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on the overall episode. What did you think? What were some of your highlights and lowlights, or Easter eggs that you saw that you'd like to call out?
I feel like we really got a lot of very intense, very rapid character development on several fronts here. First, we checked in with some old friends we hadn't seen in a while. We're catching up with Cahir. We're seeing what Fringilla's got going on. But I feel like we really see Yennefer is dealing with suddenly this dual role as parent and teacher. Ciri is going full bore into her rebellious teenage phase, trying to figure out like what her purpose, what her philosophy about life is going to be. And we really start to get the teeniest bit of information about Emhyr and how he came to power, why he's doing what he's doing, motivations that weren't really, we had other people talk about them in previous seasons and what the White Flame was trying to do, but we've never heard it straight from his mouth before. Coming in fast and furious with these characters, showing who they are or trying to figure out who they are in some new roles.
That's a really good point. I didn't realizing how much happened in that episode and like how much development there was and really pushing the narrative forward. And it was fast and furious. It was a good word for that, a good term for sure. I thought I was just getting lost because that's how I am.
I mean, the episode is called Unbound as well, and I feel like it's that same kind of idea of being fast, furious, and just can't hold me down.
Yeah.
I can't be tamed. Miley Cyrus.
You can't see Alyssa, but there's a lot of finger action going on here.
Yeah. I do definitely agree. It was a very fast episode. I do think that this episode bounced around the continent, I think a bit more than some of the other ones later in the season. But there's so much that goes on, right? Like we go to Redania, we see Philippa and Dijkstra, we see the intensity of their relationship, which is certainly like a episode call out. And then we get to see Radovid and Jaskier as well. And obviously, like, the tension there is super palpable.
Yeah,
the whole time. But both Cassie Clare as Philippa and Hugh Skinner as Radovid, two standouts from this season, in my opinion. Like, they do so well with their characters, and they fit into the world so beautifully. And I feel like there's a very strong sense of who they are. Again, in working with like a really established actor like Graham McTavish, they both hold their own so well. And I loved them this episode and I loved them in the season. carrying through the production stuff, I thought the production on this was really great. I like how the production has continued to develop since season 1 and season 2. I think the one note, which I think we'll talk about later, like the flesh monster.
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah,
God, it was too much for me. Like, I don't know, man.
I watched that and I'm like, oh, I guess someone on the production team has been playing a lot of Dark Souls, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were
right?
like, you know what this needs? This needs the creepiest creature we can come up with that is just
Yeah.
all arms.
Yeah, I think we'll dive into the plot and its place in the story and why the flesh creature exists.
Mm.
But from a production standpoint, I was like, that's some pretty heavy-handed CGI.
Yeah. I feel like they're coming into their own as the production, the sets, the costumes. It feels very buttoned up, if you will. Like that.
Mm,
It feels very professional.
yeah.
Not that it didn't, but it just feels very good coming into season 3.
Yeah, it feels very uniform in a way that I think other seasons haven't. Like, I feel like in previous seasons, you could really feel this director did episodes 1 and 2, and this director did
Oh.
episode 3 and 4, so on and so forth. But I think for the most part, like, the season feels very consistent from a production standpoint, and I do feel there were a number of things that were scaled up.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything else that you specifically liked or didn't like about the episode from an overall standpoint?
I actually thought they've really nailed down costumes really well this season. Geralt, he kind of has this like, leather black tunic look
Mm-hmm.
that is actually like super in line with what Witchers and with Witcher lore wear. If you've played The Witcher 3, at one point he's commissioning armor and he's like, it has to be light, durable, and I have to be able to put it on myself because he's so frequently alone. So Witchers don't plot around in heavy plate or really heavy mail because that's a lot of stuff and you can't put that on yourself. So he's actually got a like lore appropriate outfit on for the type of work he does, the type of travel he does, but also the style of fighting that Witchers do, which is lots of pirouettes and spins and using the very tip and edge of the blade. They're not getting heavy and close with the things they fight where they need that heavy protection.
Mhm.
So I saw that and was like, yes, that right there is perfect. I really like Tisea's new sort of dark mistress vibe that she's got with her costume.
Her dark lipstick.
Yeah. She came on screen. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. She's
That's
really
where we're going
like,
this season.
I feel like her outfit felt powerful. She's moved beyond the teacher that she was in the first season and in the second season. Obviously more, as war is brewing and conflict is happening, she was kind of thrust into that position where she has to fight. But I feel like now we're seeing this new version of her neck deep in the politics, the intrigue, the conflict, and her next to Vigilforts, who has leaned deep into the Prince of Persia
Oh my
vibe
God.
with
Gorgeous.
the deep V neck.
He looks so hot.
Yeah,
Like, I
right.
can't even
Oh,
complain.
yeah.
Like,
It's a
that
really
man
good
costume.
pulls off a robe.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he could if he wanted to.
Kyle, sit.
Sit down.
Sit, boy.
I got really big. Again, if you played The Witcher 3, the DLC Hearts of Stone introduces you to this group called the Ophiri, and they wear these long, very colorful robes. And I was definitely picking up on that from his costume in this episode. Lots of gold, it's very flowy, the deep V, lots of chest
Yeah.
going on there. But just an absolute, phenomenal look. Like you look at him and I'm like, that guy is powerful. He's
Yeah.
confident in who he is, and he is not afraid to wear all of that out on his sleeve, which is really in line with what a lot of mages and sorceresses do. They flaunt their beauty. They're not afraid to show off how hot they all are. And I think we'll get more of that at the ball at Thanid for sure.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. Okay, I haven't watched past episode 2, so I don't know what happens yet. But
That's okay. I can't wait for you to see
I
it
know,
and
right?
for you to hear the podcast episode discussions on it too.
oh my gosh. But I was going to say what Sam, it's really interesting I feel like I'm a very casual viewer. I fit the demographic of like most people watching TV. So like I always love coming into, and I feel honored coming into like podcasts like this because even hearing your perspective on the lore of like the costumage and when I was doing my episode with Alora, and she would talk about the visual stuff with the symbolism. And I love hearing people's perspectives because I would never have gotten to that. And so really cool to think about Geralt wearing this like lore specific like leather outfit because it has to be light and he has to be able to move. And it's like, yeah, as you say, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Never would have caught it myself.
I love that. And I mean, on the subject of things to catch, like Easter eggs, this season is just full of them. And
yes.
just a few that we have in this episode. Applegat, not really an Easter egg, but like you guys
love him
know,
for some reason.
I fucking love Applegat.
Why?
I don't know. Okay. I mean, probably spoiler reasons. Is it? I don't know.
I don't know.
But whenever we used to play Among Us in the Hanza Discord server, I would always play as Applegat. I just think it's a hilarious name.
It's a great name.
And what a dear of a character. But you see him in Time of Contempt, Chapter 1, and you follow him for a good part of that chapter as well. And one of the delightful things that book readers will know or will realize throughout this season is that there's a lot that's actually just lifted straight from the books, full scenes, which you'll see in this season. So when Geralt goes to see Codringer and Fen, there's a whole scene in which Geralt gives Codringer a throwing star and Codringer throws it at the wall. And he's like, you didn't even flinch. And Geralt was like, why? I could hear you aiming to miss. And that is lifted directly from the text. So, like, I was really excited when they started to play out that scene. And Simon Callow and Liz Carr are just incredible as Codringer and Fen.
Oh, yes.
And R.I.P. guys. I'm
Oh
so
my God.
sad.
Pour one out for the homies.
Yeah, right?
I know. Obviously, you know it's coming if you read the books.
Yeah.
You know Codringer and Fen die. But, like, it was more interesting to, see it on screen. And they did it in a very, like, succinct and efficient way. But then you see, like, Rince walking out with the cat and everything's in flames. It just feels like Daenerys Targaryen walking out of, like,
Oh, yes.
except there's a cat.
Yeah.
Esmeralda.
Something I really loved about the scene with Geralt and Codringer and Fen is, for fans of the games, particularly like myself, there is a moment in there that is just, it is quintessential Geralt character where they proposition him with the idea of you should get someone who looks like Ciri and then let her die. And then everyone will think Ciri is dead. And he has this just phenomenal quote where he says, I will not pay for what I love by having contempt for myself. And that is just I feel like if you could distill the essence of Geralt down to, a singular quote, like that is very near close to kind of what his character is about. Because there was a trailer for The Witcher 3 where he delivers this short monologue where he says, like, evil is evil, lesser, greater, middling, it makes no difference.
Yep.
If I'm to choose between one evil and another, I'd rather not choose at all, the kind of famous Witcher neutrality. But I felt that was just like super in line with his character. It was borderline fan service, I felt, for fans of the games. I saw that scene. It was like, oh man, they're just like right on the money with that for who he is. So the opportunity to kind of show that bit of his character in that interaction, I thought was really terrific.
Absolutely. And I think like some of the other things that we also see throughout the episode, Yennefer, when she's going to find Kira Metz, has to give a password, and it's ragamuffin, which was the code word that she had in season 1, which is very fun. If you've read the books, you'll recognize these two names that Yennefer drops later in the episode, Dominic Hoovenagel and Leo Bonhart, who are characters that appear between Baptism of Fire and Lady of the Lake. No spoilers, but you'll inevitably see them probably in future seasons of the show. As we've spoken about in previous episodes of the podcast, My Ugly One is something that Yennefer calls Ciri in the English translations of Blood of Elves, Chapter 7. So that's like a nice little call out now that they're together. It's something that they use. And in the background, when Jaskier goes to see Radovid, two of the background characters say like, oh, it's Jaskier, it's the dandelion.
Yeah, I love that.
It was a cute little thing. Yeah. So those are some of the Easter eggs that you can see in episode 302 Unbound. Were there any other ones that you guys caught?
I just have to say all my homies love Bonhart.
There are certainly homies out there that do, for spoiler reasons.
I don't know if it counts as an Easter egg necessarily, but when Geralt and Jaskier do go to visit Codringer and Fen, they address Jaskier by his title. They call him Viscount.
Yeah.
Viscount of Lettenhove.
Yeah, and I think low-key that was almost like a little flex on their part.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, oh, we know everything about everyone. Like, I know who you are.
Yeah.
That only happens, I think, once in the entire game series where someone points it out that, like, that's actually your title.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really little neat spot.
Was it in this episode or the first episode where they said his full name?
He says that to Yarpen, so that must have been in the in the first.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, now that we've gone through some of our highlights, lowlights, overall
No
thoughts.
lowlights.
No. I'm like, do I have any lowlights?
No.
I think the only lowlight would be like how CGI the flesh monster looked.
Yeah.
But I think that's the only thing. But genuinely, I think I would rather have it be slightly obvious CGI than for the scene to be too dark and not to be able to see anything at all.
Point.
Yeah.
I was also watching it on my phone like 3 inches from my face, so I really can't complain about the graphics quality.
No, that's a really solid point because I didn't even think about that. I hate when I'm watching a show and I just can't see what's happening. I'm like, why am I even watching this scene? Just like brighten it up a little bit.
Yeah. It's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, the lesser of two evils. She did the thing.
I said the line. I think that was my only, like, oh, that's kind of weird. But we'll get into it. Other than that, it was an interesting episode, and I had fun watching it.
Yeah.
So now that we've gotten all of our overall thoughts on the episode, I'd love to actually dig into the discussion questions for today. Just to start off, we spend a lot of time with Yennefer and Ciri in this episode. They're on their own. Geralt's off doing his monster hunter thing, and Yennefer is chaperoning Ciri to Aretuza. What would you guys say we learn about Yennefer through her dual role as Ciri's parent and teacher, and how do you think their relationship changes over the course of this episode?
I mean, it moves from, to me over the episode, like parent and teacher to at least trying to be more, I don't know if it's motherly or like friendship or something, where towards the end she called her Ciri instead of Ugly One. And it just like, it was like more camaraderie was building instead of just this like pupil relationship that she was having with her.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Over the course of the episode, I think she begins a certain way and then Yennefer then begins to change course because she starts calling, Ciri my ugly one, which she has very clearly ripped from how Tisea treated her when she was a student. And that's something that I saw a lot when I was in the army as a young officer. People are trying to figure out, well, what is my leadership philosophy? And what they will frequently do is they will fall back to something that they know and are already familiar with.
Yeah.
They will lean back on, well, how did my former superiors treat me when I was their junior? So she says, I'm a teacher now. She immediately leans into, well, how did my teachers treat me? And begins adopting that with Ciri. And I think quickly figures out that that may not be the best course to go forward with Ciri, because Ciri is a little bit more than just a random pupil who's shown up at the school, one of many that, this person would have instructed. She's like, I can't take that approach. And by the end has dropped calling her that, is referring to her by her first name, and takes her to the field where her home used to be and shows her what her life used to be. That is getting really personal as I think you can get with, a character like Yennefer showing that kind of deeply traumatic past and saying, this is what you need to understand about me. You don't do that with someone who you're just going to be a teacher to. She's clearly trying to bring more depth to that relationship and a very accelerated way of doing it. But when you're short on time and being chased by an evil fire wizard, you gotta step up the pace a little bit. So that's what you do.
You bring up a really good point about the Tisea piece, and it reminded me of bosses that I've had, and I feel like everybody's had these kinds of bosses, like you said, your officers and whatnot, is not even trying to figure out the leadership philosophy. That's a piece of it, but also like this happened to me, so it has to happen to you mentality of like, I went through this shit, so like you also have to go through it. Like you have to come up the same way. And it honestly feels like a lot of growth for Yen and for anybody that can do this, to kind of like break that cycle, to say like, I don't have to be that way. Why does it have to, if you don't change things, what do we expect to happen, you know?
Yeah, and I think that certainly comes into play because it feels like Yennefer's meeting Ciri halfway. Obviously, Yennefer is an older mage. We know that she's been at this for many, many decades,
Yeah.
and she's lived a very long life through, season one and then through season two as well. And Ciri, in the meantime, is some magical age between like 13 and 18. We still don't know. But all of that to say that, Yenna's probably like 6 times older than her at least.
Right.
And so Ciri's perception of who Yennefer is obviously just so narrow based on one, what Geralt has told her, and two, as she says in this episode, that Yennefer is just a vision of perfection at all times. However, when we left them off in season two, obviously there was a whole Wolfmere plotline. But that. But they're obviously still trying to develop their relationship from, oops, I almost used you as a ritualistic sacrifice for my own selfish gains, but we're going to be a family now.
Yeah.
And they spend episode 1 of season 3 with Geralt, share a wed, all of that stuff. So this is really the first time that they're actively trying to be alone and enjoy each other. Obviously, they've been together for a number of months. We see that throughout episode 1, where they go through kind of like an entire winter together and some of the year as well. So it's been a while they've been together, but probably not alone quite like this. And so it's interesting to see how Ciri's respect for Yennefer changes over the course of the episode. Even if she does respect her early on, it's coming from like a begrudging kind of place of like, you don't understand what I'm going through because I've had all these struggles. It's very teenage rebellion, right? Like, you have no idea what I'm going through. Nobody's ever experienced. Ciri's special, but still, nobody's ever experienced what I've experienced. Blah. And then I think what Ciri actually says to Yen is, how would you know what it's like to fight for control of your life? And Yennefer's like, sit down. Let me tell you. Let me tell you. And then I think the vision helps. So even if they're not completely on the same page, or even if they butt heads here and there, at least Ciri understands that this is not who Yennefer has been for her entire life. She has had her own struggles. She has come into her own. Why Aretuza is so important to her is also a huge part of that. And I do think that dynamic, like Anya and Freya do such a good job throughout this season, genuinely in building that relationship. And I think despite their real life age gap only being 5 years, there is like a maturity gap when they're acting. And I think it's fantastic because they really sell this idea of mother and daughter. And I love seeing it on screen.
I agreed with that. Even though there's that small age gap, I think they do a really good job at portraying older and younger than they are. And the only thing I feel like is missing, and Lily brought this up to me, and I was like, oh, now I see it. Like, the glass was broken to me, is I feel like Yen should be a bigger presence, like just a bigger person, because it feels like in the show she's kind of slight or smaller or whatever. And even in the video games, like she had, or the third video game, the one that I played, like she had a very big presence. And I feel like that's the one thing that's missing from her.
Yeah. I mean, as we continue to talk about Yennefer and Ciri, a huge part of that storyline in this episode is Ciri's like push for her independence and her assertion of her values and her own beliefs. And as Ciri's visions increase, she really like struggles with these feelings of responsibility to the world and to herself. So what do you think has like shaped her leadership philosophy? And looking at this episode, do you think that she was right or wrong in her actions throughout?
She has at this point, I think, just enough training to be dangerous to herself.
As all teenagers are.
You're like, oh, I know just enough about the world to have a lot of opinions on things, but not enough wisdom to understand the consequences of employing what I have. And obviously, a lot of her background is informed by the trauma of her whole family being killed, her kingdom being destroyed, being on the run. I think that informs this developing sense of justice she has. She's like, well, now I've been trained by the Witchers to wield a sword pretty effectively, and a mage has trained me how to wield magic to a certain degree. And she begins to ask herself these big questions of, well, how will I employ these skills that I have now? And in a very typical teenager way, that seems to be exactly the opposite of what mom wants me to do.
Yeah.
So she's out there freeing prisoners and making a scene in the market when
Mhm.
mom's like, be cool, man, be cool. Like, we
Yeah.
need to not bring attention to ourselves. She only sees what's 5 meters in front of her, which is that
Right.
this person is in danger. They need my help. I have the ability to offer my help, so I'm going to do it, even though in doing so, you immediately sabotage your shortcut to getting to Aretuza, now putting yourself and Yennefer in greater danger and putting Kira Metz in danger. And, the list spirals out from there because consequences of actions is not the teenager strong suit.
Yeah. To be fair, and a point to that is like wisdom comes from making mistakes and from learning. And so
Yeah.
it's like it may be easy, and not just saying this to you, Sam, just to anybody, it may be easy to like discount what she's doing because she's a teenager or whatever. And it's like we were all teenagers at one point and we had to make those mistakes to learn from them to gain that wisdom. Because unfortunately, we aren't born with wisdom and knowing what consequences are and how they all work. And so, I don't know if what she did was right or wrong. I think it's just what she did, and like you said, there's consequences to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll certainly agree with both of you. Like, I think that her life experiences have been so specific that there are so many ways in which the world has wronged her, right? To
Hmm.
Ciri, her
Mm.
parents were taken, her grandmother was taken. As you said, she lost her kingdom. She was punted around the continent. People are looking for her for nefarious purposes. The list keeps going. And so, this belief that there must be something right or I can do this, it's interesting that show Ciri is still talking about being queen because that wasn't really something that we
Yeah.
see in the books.
Mhm.
So, I think, again, with that perspective of maturity, I think book Ciri was so young that, like, obviously knows that she's a princess, but,
Yep.
like, it's kind of trained out of her very quickly through Blood of Elves, as they say. The idea of returning to royalty, though, for show Ciri is still very present. So she is establishing not only who she wants to be, but who she wants to be in the context of the entire continent, which I think is very interesting. And so that perspective, I think, inevitably shapes the kind of person that she wants to be.
Mm.
On the subject of consequence and discipline, I am very curious to see what will happen with Ciri. There's this little matrix or path that I love from like philosophy and psych, which is when you're learning a new skill, you start with unconscious incompetence. You don't know that you're bad at it.
Hmm.
And you move to a place of conscious incompetence where you know you're bad at it, but you're trying. You move to conscious competence, so you have to actively try to do it well. And then eventually to unconscious competence, where you can kind of do it and you don't even think about it. When you think about, like, oh no, I have to think about consequences and I have to actively think about them, both Geralt and Yennefer serve as bumpers for Ciri to make sure that she's learning in a relatively safe environment and that she can make mistakes in a safe environment. I'm curious what's going to happen if and when she's unleashed onto the world without those bumpers, but
Hmm.
still in a place of like unconscious incompetence for making decisions.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if she's in for a hard check on using that power without thinking about the second and third order effects too much, and if
Yeah.
it's going to end up profoundly affecting someone she cares about, and that will be a oh crap moment for her where she's like, I really got to figure this stuff out before I go employing it kind of full force on based on nothing more than my philosophy of what I think is right.
Yeah, absolutely. We're discussing consequence, and two of the characters that we re-meet, Cahir and Fringilla, we haven't seen in a hot second, and when we left them at the end of season 2, they found themselves in a bit of a pickle with the Emperor. How do you think that their imprisonments have affected them?
It just seems like Fringilla has given up, like
Mhm.
in so many ways. Although I don't know if she was looking for that guy. Like, I don't know what happened there. I'm just the guy that like had died on the table, but
Yeah.
just seemed like she gave up and is just kind of taking her punishment as it is. And Cahir, same kind of thing. It's like, oh, the emperor knows best sort of thing. Like, I just
Mm.
have to do this. No fighting back. I don't know.
Definitely both have seen better days. I think between the two of them, Cahir is a little better off because
Yeah,
he's not a general anymore, but he's still doing what he was doing before, which was fighting on behalf of the Empire.
true.
He's lost some of his prestigious position, but like he's still off doing, Emhyr's bidding in that martial way. Whereas Fringilla goes from powerful mage to poison tester in the dungeon with a couple dimeridium shackles on her
Yeah, right.
hands. Remember, she came on screen. And I'm like, oof,
He-
Fringilla having a rough go of it.
Yeah.
They have
Not
about
look,
the same chance of dying now, though. Yeah.
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 Fringilla clearly has not thrown in the towel completely in that she sees the opportunity to pull a Count of Monte Cristo and takes full advantage of it. Her magic is, obviously shackled, but her mind, even the heavily intoxicated version that comes from testing 800 wine cups, is still there, and she's still looking for something beyond, her lot in life there. And so she sees an opportunity, has the mental capacity to take advantage of that, and manages to, find a way out of that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this because I didn't see this.
At the end?
Yeah, so was she like escaping?
Yeah, so the guy beside her dies. She puts both of them in the body bag, and when it gets thrown out into the
what
woods.
happened. Okay.
Yeah. When it gets
Yeah.
thrown out, they're just like, oh, they're getting heavier by the day, and then
That's
just chuck them
okay.
out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I must have been doing something with Freya at that moment, and I was like, first of all, how is she in the woods? What's she looking for? I was like, what's happening in this? Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, though, that you say that, Sam, because I would say the other way around. I think Fringilla has it better off than Cahir,
Really?
simply because Fringilla seems to have given up on the Empire.
Mm.
Cahir is still all in. He is
Yeah,
still
very much
doing
so.
he is still all in for the White Flame. And he's just like, yeah, I mean, if I die, I die. Gallatin gives him like a hard time about it. Like, why the fuck are you out here?
Yeah.
What has this guy done to get such like cockeyed loyalty out of you?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, he's still very programmed into what Nilfgaard's selling. That man is 98% Kool-Aid. And so it's like,
That's true.
I would say in that case, Fringilla's better off because she still acknowledges that separation, and she is, like, I think on the road to recovering her independence and her sense of self. And I don't think Cahir is there yet.
Maybe it's because she was the mage to Nilfgaard and not Nilfgaardian, so it wasn't as much brainwashing. Like
Maybe.
she didn't have as much to overcome to be like, this guy sucks.
I mean, she seemed pretty in it
Yeah.
the last 2 seasons.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, I do think she had a harder fall from grace because she brought herself to a pretty high position, even independently of the Emperor, because she was doing this in partnership throughout season 2.
Mhm.
So maybe she was kind of like, not on her way out, but just like establishing independence in season 2, and then has now fallen so far that she's still on that road. But I think Cahir's punishment is just like, well, back-breaking,
Yeah.
face-breaking labor, but I still got the hots for my guy, so whatever. Like, I don't know.
That's a really good point. She may have broken free of her programming there, and he is definitely still in it. So yeah, she can begin to forge anew. He has got a more difficult time ahead of him to figure out what's important for him.
Absolutely. And I think we start to see flashes of that here, right? Like, he has that vision of Ciri briefly as he's getting the crap beat out of him. That man has been obsessively trying to look for this girl since literally episode 1. So I think the fact that he's having visions now is new, and I think it's going to deeply affect him.
You think it's like trauma hallucinations or like he had powers or something?
Or the concussion hallucinations.
Yeah, that too. Right.
I mean, it might be one of those things that, like, yeah, like if you get your head knocked hard enough, like
You just start seeing stuff. Yeah.
you see stuff, but like he's spent so many years between the first and second Nilfgaardian War, like trying to find this girl, and so like is his mind just reverting to still gotta find her, still gotta find
Oh,
her,
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
despite the punishment that's still there.
Yeah.
So I think when Gallatin even says, like, yeah, Francesca's off looking for this girl, and turns out she's some Cintran dummy.
He's like, Cintran?
And Cintran girl?
Tell
and
me more.
Like, he just beat bops back into place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the secret word, and like everybody. Oh man.
How many years has it been in on the continent between those wars?
Oh god. I mean, canonically, I don't know. I should know that.
Is it like less than a decade, do you think?
I would say less than a decade based on the books.
Right.
Because I want to say at the end of Sword of Destiny, Ciri is somewhere between 8 and 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that toward the end of the series, she's about 16 to 18.
Okay, so yeah.
So somewhere
About a decade, yeah.
somewhere there, yeah. But I don't know about the Netflix show.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say it's probably been maybe a year to 2 years
Oh,
since it
okay.
started. Well, if you're looking at kind of the events in which they happened, like there's probably episode 1, Sherrowed, I would say probably takes place over the course of 6 months to a year. And then I want to say the entirety of episode 2, if I'm remembering correctly, was over the course of like 1 to 2 months.
Mm,
It's hard to say.
yeah.
Mm.
TBD for TWN.
Yeah. But regardless, Cahir has been at this for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
On the subject of Nilfgaard and the Empire, this episode gives us an extended scene with Nilfgaardian Emperor Emhyr Emris for the first time since episode 104 of Banquets, Bastards, and Burials. How would you say our perception of him as a viewer has changed throughout the course of the series?
I mean, obviously, the early seasons leaned heavily into Nilfgaard is bad, they're imperialist, they're here to conquer all of us, and the sacking and rape of Cintra did not put a lot of points on the board for Nilfgaardian goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously the big reveal that Emhyr is actually Dunny, who the only background we have on him is actually being kind of like a decent guy who was, by all accounts, you know, just a
Hedgehog Man?
Just a regular hedgehog man.
hedgehog man who is regular hedgehog man trying his best, you know.
Yeah.
Who among us hasn't been a cursed knight who falls in love with a princess? But you know, that is the background we get with him. And obviously those early scenes we have, you know, Geralt sticking up for him in a fight, refusing to obey orders from the Cintran royalty to just kill him right there. So it's interesting contrast, because if you asked me to pick a character, like who's the guy who leads the imperialist empire in destroying this kingdom, I would not be like that guy.
Good point.
You know, the kind of big reveal, but like the only information we have about his motivations and Nilfgaard's motivations come from other people talking about their experiences with the White Flame, how he, in Fringilla's case, she talks about how he, you know, picked her up and raised her up to her position, and is one of the reasons for her fierce loyalty, that she's willing to stand up to all the other mages and sorceresses in defense of, you know, what Nilfgaard's doing, when everyone else from her guild is basically on the other side of the table saying that isn't cool.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm very curious to see what more they reveal about him, because he talks about how, well, my throne was taken from me, and this is how I was able to reclaim it. We get a little bit of, you know, insight into his motivations for how he even came to power in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. But I would almost go so far as to say the background we're shown about his character from others almost contrasts deeply with the conduct of his empire, because everyone seems to say he's this great guy, he lifted me up when I was at my lowest, and he was the little dude who Geralt stuck up for in the fight to say, you know, quit picking on that guy, that's wrong. But the conduct of his armies and the goals of his empire seem to be almost completely at odds with that little bit. And obviously that may come into clearer picture later as we learn more about him. But I thought that contrast that exists insofar as this episode is kind of interesting.
Yeah. It's an interesting choice for how to introduce him as well in this season, because he just steps into a tent and he starts monologuing at this, you know, dwarven blacksmith.
Yeah.
And it's like, cool.
All
And
right.
obviously she's like, well, I had to take the job or my wife doesn't want to see my head on a pike. Like,
Yeah.
obviously. So there's still that, I don't know, Dooney's got a balloon for a head sometime between episode 104 and like 302.
Yeah, what happens?
Yeah, it's kind of that I do think your assessment is accurate, Sam. Whatever we know about this character, we mostly hear it from what other people are doing on behalf of the White Flame. And so it's this weird thing where now we're starting to like humanize this larger than life character
Mhm.
because, oh no, like people have burned like entire kingdoms and gone through a ridiculous amount of genocide for this man. And then he's literally in a tent role playing through how he like killed the usurper and I beheaded him with this sword. And it's
Yeah.
like, are you real?
Right.
Who are you?
Yeah,
Who even are you?
it's really
Yeah.
interesting that he was Dooney because it does seem like a different character. I mean, he's a different person now. It's not the same. It has to have been a choice by the writer to write the villain like that, one of the villains like that, because it is going to divide some people to be like, oh, well, he used to be just like a regular hedgehog man who, is so unassuming and, like you said, kind of humanizing him in a way, but like he's not a good guy, right? Like he's running a horrible empire. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, who hurt you, Emhyr?
Yeah, exactly.
Who hurt
The
you?
usurper.
The
Yeah.
usurper. I mean, maybe we'll learn more about what he suffered after the usurper came into power, and that
Yeah.
may give some insight into why he is changed. But
Mhm.
losing one's entire family can make them irritable, I guess.
But it's interesting because we just rolled off of a conversation about how Ciri's sense of justice comes from losing her entire family. And she's acting and conducting herself in such a way that's closer to like a vigilante, right? Than somebody who lost their kingdom, took it back, and then is still waging war across the continent.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. We'll see how far the apple falls from the tree, I guess.
It's a good point for like, are you a product of your environment or can you change kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's a question we will get answers to over the course of future seasons as well. As we uniquely, I think, in the show, learn more about Emhyr var Emris as Ciri's father,
Yeah.
which we don't get in the books. We can talk about it openly now in the podcast just because it came out in the show.
Yeah, that's
But we'll
true.
have kind of deeper discussions about this and about our chapters with Emhyr throughout the books over however many years this podcast is going to go on for.
It took so fucking long in the books to get to that point.
It was
literally
like
the last
second to
chapter,
last
right?
chapter or third to last
Yeah.
chapter.
And you're like, wait, Dooney?
Wild. Genuinely wild.
I wish they held on to that secret in the show because it was such a good secret. I don't know.
To be fair to production, I think Lauren Hissrich did do interviews and she was like, I don't know how we would have done it, so we just didn't.
Yeah.
And like, to be fair, I think like you can obviously have that secret in a book
Right.
when there are no visuals. But when I think they explored casting different actors or trying to like put prosthetics on him and ultimately just, I mean, Bart Edwards is a lovely looking man, but settled for keeping him as he is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just like slapped a beard on him.
No, that's a good point from like the production side, something you're very much into. And so you can very much be compassionate towards, and it's like,
Empathize,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point. It probably is very difficult to deal with visuals rather than just writing it in a book.
Yeah, because I imagine if you didn't show his face, you just kind of have to casually pan around the back of his chair like he's like a parent in like
Like a
in
kid
like
show.
the fucking Peanuts.
Yeah, exactly. Wah, wah.
Or like he's that like hot lady in Powerpuff
Oh, yeah,
Girls who you
yeah,
never
yeah.
see her face.
Yes.
I
You
feel like
only ever
every
see her
parent,
legs.
like-
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it would just get weird after like 7 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a
But
certain
that's all
point.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, is what it is. And I think this obviously opens up opportunities for storytelling from both the Nilfgaardian side as well as for the audience to have that dramatic irony of knowing all of these things about Nilfgaard and about Ciri that she doesn't know about herself. So I think that it's certainly going to be interesting to explore Nilfgaard and that family aspect as Ciri is finding her own family with Geralt and Yen.
Hmm.
So, yeah. Speaking of our dear boy, Geralt, in this episode, his storyline focuses really on his discovery at Vuilpanne Castle.
Hmm.
We spoke briefly about the monsters in the beginning of the episode. Wild flesh monster with disattached heads coming out of the wall. How do you guys think this monster fight compares to others that we've seen in the series? And how does this fight specifically further the plot?
For me, the one thing that jumped out, and I'm sure it did for all of you guys, was there was this aspect of it not being a monster because it had these heads of women who were disembodied, who weren't really, I don't know if they were controlling the monster or what, but they were like, why are you attacking us? And it's like, well, I mean, like, it's attacking him. So, like, he's just defending himself, but you almost feel bad for it because then once he hits the heart of that one person, the head dies, and there's like this whole thing, it's, yeah,
Yeah.
like it's a monster that kind of toes the line between human and monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually a huge fan of this fight compared to the monsters we faced in previous seasons. I was not a huge fan of how they portrayed the Leshy in
Okay.
season
Oh,
2.
okay.
Either the one out in nature, which kind of, throws roots around like tentacles, or the bizarre tree ball
Yeah.
that Eskel turns into.
Oh, God.
Maybe I'm in part biased because I thought the way they did Leshens in The Witcher 3, the game,
So
was
good.
terrifying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
utterly terrifying. So I remember the hype when I was like, oh, there's a Leshen in season 2. I was like, this thing's going to be scary.
And it's just
Mhm.
an ent.
Yeah, it's like bad. It was like bad end. But I thought actually because Rentz has this reputation of like he's a dark mage, he's messing with stuff you really shouldn't mess with.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
feel like we kind of get that full force with this creature that he has created down in the caves below the fortress he's working out of. With The Witcher and a lot of these dark universes, there's a little bit of a horror aspect that I feel like you can't overdo, but when you can bring it in, it can go a long way to show just how really messed up some people are. And I think this sort of really kind of terrifying, like Dark Souls creation, beyond the fight being terrific, I think actually does a lot to show about who Rentz is and who he's working for, what they're kind of up to. It's like, oh, these are some really bad people. Like, look at this monstrosity they've created down here in the dark. So I was actually a huge fan of both this fight and kind of the meaning behind it. Because it was a little bit more than just Geralt finds monster, Geralt kills monster, which
Yeah.
like I'm always down for. I'm always down for a Witcher doing what Witchers do. But this had a second layer to it in exploring a little bit more about something else, and I really liked that.
Yeah, I think that The Witcher shines when it gets to be a monster of the week kind of thing, and we haven't really delved into that. Like, I think we got the Chernobog in season 2,
Hmm.
which I think I had mixed feelings on because the character design, the monster design, in my opinion, felt a little strange. Could be the Other Worlds thing, but I wasn't super sold on the Chernobog design for season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Season 1, though, we got the Striga, and I feel like that entire fight and the choreography and the cinematography around the Striga felt very comparable to this fight in this castle here. And the creature design felt very Whovian, felt like Doctor Who to me. I think the girls coming out of the wall, and I'm just
Yes.
like,
Never
there are
watched
too
it.
many disembodied heads in, in Doctor Who.
Moisturize me.
Moisturize me.
Moisturize me.
Yeah. Or even like, that's a fun little, someone out there is having a laugh. Or PTSD like type flashbacks.
Yeah.
One or the other. It felt very sci-fi to an
Yes.
extent, which, I don't mind.
Mhm.
And I do think, as you said, Sam, like it encapsulates the horror that one of these characters is actively bringing to the continent and to the plot. We understand that it horrifies Geralt, and as we'll learn in future episodes, the extent to which it really does shake him, what he discovered here. So I think that that's really important. And we talk a lot about Geralt's neutrality and how he feels about creatures and his attempt to save them when it's possible. He obviously saves one of the women in that cave,
Mhm.
but the others, he gets that, fight response and he kills the monster that's attacking him, not totally being aware that there's still some connection between the women's disembodied faces and the creature. But yeah, it's incredibly unnerving to like watch him battle this flesh monster and have the women just be begging like, please don't
Yeah.
kill us, please don't kill us, please don't kill us.
Mhm.
It's, I think, that question of like, is it mercy? Is it not? You know, like they seem to have some sort of cognizance
Hmm.
and awareness of their situation. They know what is happening to them. They reference a man who visits them and a woman who visits them, but they don't seem to be completely aware of what their body is doing or their ability to control it, but they know that it's part of them.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is a whole horror piece unto itself.
You said sci-fi, and that really clicked for me, is because, and I think that's where it didn't fit for me, is this world isn't sci-fi, it's cultural, lore and whatnot. And I think that's where I loved the monsters in Witcher 3, is they all had some sort of significance from cultures around the world, whether it be like basilisks or harpies or
Hmm.
leshen or whatever they are. Like they have some sort of cultural significance, whereas this, it is just like somebody's fever dream sci-fi, monstrosity, which for me personally, I don't think that it fits in this show, but that's just me.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I think that is a very fair critique, especially as you're looking at, as you said, like The Witcher as a reflection of pan-European mythology. It
Yeah,
really often does reflect fantasy and folklore.
right.
But yeah, that's pretty much all the questions that we had around this specific episode. Do you guys have any last minute thoughts on episode 302 Unbound?
I feel like we can't leave without talking about that scene
Oh
with
my God.
Dijkstra and Philippa.
Was it just me or was it sexual? I mean,
So as that scene begins and like I hear the crack of the whip, I'm like, oh, Dijkstra's into that real kinky
yeah,
shit.
exactly.
But then as it develops and they talk, you realize this is actually just like the world's most bizarre therapy session.
That's what I was
Mm.
That
getting from it at the
like
end. Yeah.
he's using this as a way to like learn more about himself. And I'm like, Dijkstra, man, there are better ways
Yeah.
to get in touch with yourself and what's bothering you. But I
Men,
mean,
right?
men will do anything
But go to
besides go to therapy.
So good, dude. Oh my God.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like it's a really interesting for Dijkstra's character because up to this point, he is, we've kind of gotten glimpses of this in the last season, but he presents as the all powerful head of Redanian intelligence, a very
Hmm.
powerful, strong figure. But, we have that one scene, I think, last season with him kind of like he's got his shirt off and he's sort of like talking to himself very quickly while Philippa is sitting there in her owl form. And I'm
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, that's kind of strange. And then we have this scene in this season, and we're kind of getting some more insights into who he is and what it takes to maybe not maintain the mask, but like maintain that level of involvement in this really heavy stuff because
Mhm.
he's giving serious recommendations to, the King of Redania about what should happen on the continent. And like, all right, man, if that's how you need to blow off steam, like,
Hmm.
Yeah.
we don't kink shame here, but
Yeah.
No, we don't.
No. To me, he does come off a little like softer than he does in the video games and in the book, because
Mm.
he does come off in those other contexts as this very powerful person. Not to say that the Dijkstra in the show isn't. I don't know. There's something about it. Yeah.
It feels the Dijkstra that we see, and I think the books and in the games, is wildly unapologetic and
Yes.
ruthless.
Yes.
Like
Mhm.
little
That's
to
what
no
it is.
remorse for what he is doing for himself and for Redania.
Yep.
And there's a favorite chapter. I say favorite, it grew on me. I think the first time I read this chapter in Blood of Elves, I was just like, this is boring as shit. And then as I like kept rereading the books, I was like, you know what? It's a Dijkstra chapter and I really like it.
Mm.
And you learn a lot about his character and the kind of negotiator he is. But it's still that kind of, even in moments of self-doubt in the books, he is still very clear-headed about what he needs, how to get it, and the network which he leads.
Hmm.
And I think this side of Dijkstra, I think, is really interesting, this scene in the show. It actually explicitly shows his remorse. Like, he talks
Yeah.
about this elf that he killed. We could have turned her. We didn't have to kill her. They forced me to cut her in 1,000 different ways. And I'm wondering, to what extent is this kind of like, did he black this out and this is about remembering for him?
Yeah.
Or is this some sort of like repentance where he himself is now just being cut up in the back And
Mhm.
I don't think asking for forgiveness, but just recalling the memory of this person who has died because of him.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's like a huge part of it as well. So I would say the difference is that like cutthroat, unapologetic ruthlessness versus a character that feels like it had, especially in the context of like how insane Vizimir is, has a little bit less control and possibly a little bit more remorse and depth than we've seen from the character in other surfaces.
I think that's really spot on. His Witcher 3 character operates like a mob boss,
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
it's
Yeah,
wild.
exactly.
I
completely.
mean, I love it.
Oh,
Like,
it's
Yeah.
it's
terrific.
great.
Just
It makes you
cold.
hate him.
Yeah.
Yeah, cold-blooded, willing, depending on which plot line you select in The Witcher 3, he is willing to kill many people that he has worked with for a
Yeah.
long time and just knife him right in the back to get what he wants.
Yeah, I feel like he even turns on Philippa, and so like it just like, or he would. Like, it's just very.
Yeah. I feel like we're getting some insight into maybe a different version of this character that I think is really interesting and opens up a little more depth for exploring that. A little bit of exploration of, maybe some PTSD and what that means for
Mhm.
that's dark fantasy. Even
Yep.
the good people are not really that great when you get to know them, all the way down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. That's a scene that we couldn't leave without discussing because I think what this episode does well is it starts to set up a lot more of the conflict that we'll see later in the season.
Hmm.
Sherwed, the previous episode, felt pretty self contained, but now we're seeing what some of the stakes are. So, for example, for Fringilla and Cahir, and even the Emperor of Nilfgaard, like what the stakes are and where they're seeing themselves at the start of the season. Yennefer and Ciri's relationship, we're understanding how they're establishing their relationship and the way that which they communicate with each other, and hopefully seeing the early seeds of Ciri's personal philosophy, her values, and how those are going to be challenged in the future is going to be so important. Same thing for Geralt. He is such like a huge storyline throughout the course of season 3. So for him to like go off and do his Monster of the Week detective stuff is absolutely fantastic. Same thing with Jaskier and Radovid, Philippa and Dijkstra. Getting all the players in place in this episode is so critical, and I'm glad we got to see a lot of that here. So, as we kind of close out the episode for the day, that is all for our show today. Kyle, Sam, thank you guys so much for joining me for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. You can find both Kyle and Sam in the Hanza Discord, along with the rest of our community at bit.ly/the Hanza Discord, and chat with us about the episode. So, next episode, join us as we continue our discussion of The Witcher Season 3 with episode 303, Reunion. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Sherry Guo, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Megaberg Glamorai, The Original Brooch, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. Special thanks to Kyle and Sam for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support. Hi, Bubby. What are you doing? Are you interrupting my silence? Hello. Okay. Thank you. That was very lovely. Okay, bye-bye.